I knew my daughter-in-law wanted me out of the picture, but I never imagined she would erase my name as if I had never been part of the family at all. My name is Margaret Wilson. I'm 68 years old, a widow, a mother, and a grandmother. For most of my life, I believed that family was something you protected, even when it hurt. Especially when it hurt. That belief carried me through the loss of my husband 6 years ago. It carried me through lonely holidays, quiet evenings, and all the changes that come when the people you love start building lives of their own. But there comes a moment when loyalty stops looking like kindness and starts looking like permission. The moment arrived on a bright Saturday morning in May. The kind of morning that smelled like fresh-cut grass and blooming flowers. I was sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee, scrolling through social media while waiting for my blueberry muffins to finish baking. My granddaughter Sophie was turning 14 that weekend. I had spent 3 weeks picking out her gift. A silver charm bracelet with tiny stars engraved on it because she once told me she wanted to study astronomy when she grew up. I smiled when I imagined her opening the box. Then I saw the photograph. At first, it looked like an ordinary family picture. Balloons. Streamers. A long decorated table in a private event room at a local restaurant. Sophie stood in the center wearing a bright yellow dress and a smile that stretched from ear to ear. Around her stood everyone. My son Ethan. My daughter-in-law Olivia. My sister Carol. My nephew Ben. Even relatives who lived 3 states away. Everyone was there. Everyone except me. I stared at the image, convinced I was missing something. Maybe the party had happened early. Maybe it was a school event. Maybe there was an explanation. Then I read Olivia's caption. Perfect family celebration for our favorite girl. So grateful everyone could make it. Everyone. My hands froze around the coffee mug. The room suddenly felt too quiet. I clicked through the photos one by one. There were pictures of the cake. Pictures of the gifts. Pictures of the family gathered around Sophie while she blew out candles. There was even a group photo in front of a giant banner displaying the names of all the guests. I leaned closer to the screen. My breath caught in my throat. My name wasn't there. Not forgotten. Not misspelled. Not moved to another section. It simply didn't exist. As if I had never been invited. As if I had never belonged. The timer on the oven beeped. I didn't move. The muffins could burn for all I cared. I kept staring at that banner, looking for some sign that I was wrong. Some proof that this was all a misunderstanding. Then my phone buzzed. A text message from Ethan. Hope you're having a nice weekend, Mom. Nothing else. No mention of Sophie's birthday. No mention of the party. No explanation. I read the message 3 times. Something inside me shifted. Not anger. Not yet. It was something colder. A quiet realization. This hadn't happened by accident. People accidentally forget a phone call. They accidentally miss an email. They do not accidentally organize an entire birthday celebration and invite every member of the family except one person. I set my phone down carefully. Outside, the sun continued shining. Cars rolled past my house. Somewhere in town, families were gathering for lunch. Life moved forward exactly as it always had. But as I sat alone at my kitchen table staring at that photograph, I realized a painful truth. Someone had spent a very long time making me disappear. And for the first time, I decided I was going to find out exactly why. I did not call Ethan back that day. I did not send a message to Olivia. I did not leave a comment under the photographs. Instead, I sat quietly in my kitchen long after the coffee had gone cold. The silence felt familiar. In fact, the more I thought about it, the more I realized that silence had become a permanent guest in my life over the last few years. At first, I convinced myself that everyone was simply busy. Ethan had a demanding career. Olivia always seemed to have another event, another project, another reason why plans had to change. Sophie was growing up and spending more time with friends. It all sounded reasonable when viewed one moment at a time. But when I began placing those moments side by side, a different picture started to emerge. I opened an old photo album that afternoon. Not because I wanted to revisit memories, but because I wanted to remember dates. Christmas 3 years ago. I had spent 2 days preparing dinner. The turkey was in the oven. The table was decorated with my late husband Robert's favorite holiday centerpiece. 2 hours before everyone was supposed to arrive, Olivia called. She apologized and explained that they had decided to celebrate at her sister's house instead. She sounded cheerful, casual, as though changing plans at the last minute was completely normal. I ate leftovers for nearly a week after that. Then there was Sophie's school concert the following spring. I had asked several times when it would begin. Olivia told me 7 o'clock. When I arrived, the auditorium was nearly empty. The performance had ended 40 minutes earlier. Sophie had already gone home. Ethan later claimed there must have been a misunderstanding. At the time, I accepted the explanation. Now I was not so sure. Another memory surfaced. A family barbecue 2 summers ago. I found photographs online afterward. Everyone was there. Cousins, neighbors, friends, even Ethan's old college roommate. When I asked about it, Olivia laughed and said it had been a spontaneous gathering. Yet, somehow dozens of people had known about it except me. The pattern continued the more I thought about it. Little exclusions, small omissions, tiny cuts that barely hurt on their own but left scars when added together. I stood and walked into my living room. A framed photograph sat on the fireplace mantel. Robert and I were smiling beside Ethan on his wedding day. I remembered how proud I had been. I remembered welcoming Olivia into our family with genuine affection. I had helped pay for the rehearsal dinner. I had spent months making decorations by hand because she wanted something personal and elegant. Back then, I believed we would become close. Instead, the distance between us seemed to grow with every passing year. That evening, my phone rang. It was my sister Carol. Her voice sounded nervous. We exchanged small talk for a few minutes before she finally cleared her throat. "Margaret, are you upset about Sophie's birthday?" she asked carefully. I looked out the window at the fading sunlight. "Should I be?" There was a pause. A long one. "I assumed you could not make it," Carol said. "Olivia told everyone you had another commitment." I closed my eyes. For several seconds I could not speak. Not because I was shocked. Because I was not shocked at all. Something deep inside me had already known. "I was home all day," I replied quietly. Carol inhaled sharply. Neither of us said anything after that. We did not need to. The truth had entered the room and settled between us. When the call ended, I placed my phone face down on the table and stared into the darkness gathering outside. For years I had blamed circumstances. Bad timing. Miscommunication. Simple mistakes. But mistakes do not repeat themselves with such precision. And for the first time, I stopped asking whether I was being excluded. The real question was how long it had been happening without me noticing. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. Sleep had come in short fragments, interrupted by old memories that no longer felt innocent. I made breakfast, watered the flowers on my front porch, and tried to follow my normal routine. But my mind kept returning to Carol's phone call. Someone had told my family I could not attend Sophie's birthday party. Someone had made that decision for me. By noon, I found myself opening social media again. I told myself I was only looking for answers. What I found was something else entirely. Olivia had posted dozens of photographs from the party. Most people probably would have scrolled past them without a second thought. I studied every image, every face, every detail. Years of raising a family had taught me that people often reveal more than they realize. In one photograph, Ethan stood beside a banner decorated with family pictures. I recognized almost every image immediately. There was Sophie as a toddler, Ethan graduating from college, a Christmas photo from years ago. Then I noticed something strange. Several older family photographs were missing, the ones that included me. Another image showed a memory table displaying framed pictures from family vacations and holiday gatherings. Once again, I was nowhere to be found. My chest tightened. Perhaps it was coincidence. Perhaps there was an explanation. But deep down, I knew better. The pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. That evening, my niece Rachel called. We spoke often, and unlike many relatives, she never seemed uncomfortable around me. Halfway through the conversation, she mentioned the birthday party. Aunt Margaret, I was surprised you were not there, she said. Sophie kept looking toward the door during the first hour. I sat up straighter. She did. Of course. She asked Olivia twice if you were coming. For several seconds, I could not respond. Rachel continued speaking, unaware of what her words were doing to me. Olivia told her you were traveling with friends and could not make it. Traveling. Another lie. Another story carefully prepared before anyone could ask questions. After we ended the call, I walked into my living room and sat beside the window. Outside, neighborhood children rode bicycles along the sidewalk. A golden sunset stretched across the sky. Everything looked peaceful. Yet for the first time, I realized how much effort someone had invested in rewriting my place within the family. It was not enough to leave me out. They needed everyone else to believe I had chosen not to be there. That thought stayed with me for days. Then, 3 evenings later, something unexpected happened. My phone lit up with a message from Olivia. At first glance, it looked ordinary. But as I read it, my heart began to pound. Can you make sure nobody mentions the guest list to Margaret? I do not want another awkward conversation. I stared at the screen. The message had not been sent to me intentionally. It was obviously meant for someone else. A second later, the message disappeared. Olivia had unsent it. But not before I had read every word. I looked at the screen for a long time. No anger. No tears. Just clarity. For years I had doubted my instincts. I had explained away every disappointment and every exclusion. Now there was no explanation left. The message confirmed what my heart had been trying to tell me. This was never a misunderstanding. It was a decision. A deliberate one. And whoever had started it believed I would never discover the truth. They believed I would continue smiling politely from the sidelines while my role in the family quietly disappeared. As I set my phone on the table that night, I made a promise to myself. I would stop accepting the version of events other people created for me. I would find out exactly how this started, exactly who benefited from it, and exactly what they were trying to hide. For the next week, I became an observer in my own family. I did not confront anyone. I did not mention the message. I simply watched. It is amazing what people reveal when they believe you are no longer paying attention. One afternoon, I sat at my kitchen table sorting old paperwork when I came across a folder Robert had organized years before his passing. My husband had always been meticulous. Every document had a label. Every receipt had a place. As I flipped through the pages, I found photographs from family gatherings stretching back nearly 20 years. I noticed something immediately. In the older pictures, I was everywhere. Standing beside Ethan at his college graduation. Holding Sophie as a baby. Sitting beside Olivia at holiday dinners. Smiling at backyard cookouts. Then, slowly, the images changed. The newer the photographs became, the less visible I was. At first I appeared at the edge of the frame. Then only in group shots. Then not at all. It felt like watching someone erase a pencil drawing one careful stroke at a time. A few days later, I attended a community fundraiser at the local library. I almost stayed home. Looking back, I am glad I went. Near the refreshment table, I ran into Diane, an old family friend who had known Ethan since he was a child. We exchanged hugs and spent a few minutes talking about retirement, grandchildren, and the rising price of groceries. Then she said something that caught me off guard. I was surprised you could not make the lake weekend last fall. I frowned. What lake weekend? Diane looked confused. The family retreat. Olivia said you declined because you wanted a quiet weekend alone. I felt the same chill I had felt after speaking with Carol and Rachel. Another event. Another explanation. Another decision made in my name without my knowledge. Diane continued talking, unaware of the storm building behind my smile. According to her, Olivia had told several people that I preferred keeping my distance from large family gatherings. That I enjoyed being alone. That traveling was difficult for me now. The strange thing was that none of it was true. I had never said any of those things. Yet somehow they had become part of the story people believed. That night I sat on my back porch long after sunset. The air was warm. Crickets chirped in the distance. Across the street, lights glowed from neighboring homes. Families gathered around dinner tables. Televisions flickered behind curtains. Ordinary life continued. I thought about Olivia. For years, I had viewed her actions as personal dislike. But now I began to see something more deliberate. This was not simply about keeping me away from a few events. It was about controlling the narrative. If people believed I chose not to attend family gatherings, then nobody would question my absence. Nobody would ask uncomfortable questions. Nobody would notice I was being pushed aside. The realization hurt more than I expected. Not because strangers believed the story. Because Ethan appeared to believe it too. Or worse, because he knew the truth and allowed it to continue. I picked up my phone and scrolled through old text messages. Most conversations with Ethan had become brief over the years. Birthday wishes, holiday greetings, quick updates, practical exchanges. The warmth that once came naturally between us seemed buried beneath layers of distance. I stared at his name on the screen and remembered the little boy who used to run into my arms after school. The young man who once called me whenever he needed advice. Somewhere along the way, that connection had faded. Whether by choice or influence, I still did not know. But as I sat there under the porch light, one thing became clear. Olivia had not simply removed me from events. She had spent years creating a version of me that made my absence seem normal. And the more I uncovered, the more convinced I became that there was a reason she wanted me out of the picture. The answer arrived sooner than I expected. A week later, I received a call from Michael Jensen, the attorney who had handled much of Robert's estate planning years earlier. I had not spoken with him in almost 18 months. His voice sounded warm, but unusually formal. He asked if I could stop by his office the following Tuesday. When I asked why, he paused for a moment before saying he wanted to review a few documents connected to family assets. The phrase caught my attention immediately. Family assets. Robert had always been careful with money. He believed financial security was not just about wealth, but about protecting the people you loved from future uncertainty. During our marriage, we had built a comfortable life together. Nothing extravagant. A paid-off home. Retirement accounts. Several long-term investments. A small collection of commercial properties that generated steady income. Most of those matters had been organized years ago and rarely required my attention. On Tuesday morning, I drove across town to Michael's office. The building looked exactly as I remembered. The same brick exterior. The same polished wood reception desk. The same framed photographs hanging in the hallway. Michael greeted me personally and led me into a conference room. Several folders were already waiting on the table. For the next hour, he reviewed documents that Robert had carefully structured before his passing. Trust agreements. Property records. Investment summaries. I listened quietly, taking notes whenever something seemed important. Then Michael opened a folder near the bottom of the stack. There is one thing many people misunderstand about your family's financial structure, he said. Including, I suspect, some members of your own family. I looked up. He slid a document across the table toward me. My name appeared prominently on the first page. According to the agreement, I retained full authority over several key trusts and investment entities. Any significant transfer, restructuring, liquidation, or distribution required my approval. Without it, nothing substantial could move forward. I blinked. You are telling me that these decisions still belong to me? Michael nodded. Exactly. A strange feeling settled over me. Not excitement. Not relief. Clarity. During the past several years, I had gradually been made to feel irrelevant, unimportant, easy to overlook. Yet here in black and white was evidence that my role had never disappeared at all. Legally and financially, I remained at the center of decisions that could affect the family for decades. Michael continued speaking. He explained that there had been several recent inquiries regarding future asset distributions. Nothing improper. Nothing illegal. But enough interest to raise questions about long-term expectations. Who made the inquiries? I asked. He chose his words carefully. Most came through Ethan's household. Ethan's household. He did not need to say the name. I already knew. On the drive home, I thought about everything I had learned. The missing invitations. The false explanations. The carefully crafted stories about my absence. Suddenly, those actions looked different. Much different. If someone hoped to gain influence over future family decisions, removing me from the emotional center of the family would certainly make things easier. People are less likely to question the disappearance of someone they no longer see. Less likely to defend someone they believe has stepped away voluntarily. That evening I sat on my porch with a glass of iced tea and watched the sun sink below the horizon. For the first time in weeks, I was not focused on what had been taken from me. I was focused on what remained. My voice. My position. My ability to make choices. Whoever had spent years pushing me to the margins clearly believed I was becoming weaker, smaller, easier to ignore. The truth was exactly the opposite. The more I learned, the more dangerous their assumptions became. And for the first time since this journey began, I stopped feeling like the person being excluded from the story. I started feeling like the person who finally understood how the story really worked. After my meeting with Michael, I made a decision that surprised even me. I stopped trying to repair relationships that only seemed to matter when I was the one making the effort. For years, I had been the first person to call on birthdays, the first to apologize after misunderstandings, the first to smooth over uncomfortable moments during family gatherings. I had convinced myself that keeping the peace was the same thing as preserving a family. Now I was beginning to understand the difference. Keeping the peace often meant sacrificing my own dignity while everyone else remained comfortable. So I became quiet. Not angry. Not dramatic. Just quiet. I stopped sending cheerful messages that received one-word replies. I stopped asking whether plans existed for upcoming holidays. I stopped volunteering information about my schedule in hopes that someone might include me. The silence that followed was revealing. Days passed without a single call from Olivia. Then a week. Then 2. Ethan sent a brief text asking how I was doing. I replied politely. The conversation ended after 3 messages. That alone told me everything I needed to know. If I stopped carrying the relationship, it barely moved at all. One Saturday afternoon, I attended Sophie's soccer game. The schedule was public on the school website, so nobody could claim there had been confusion. I arrived early and found a seat in the bleachers. The weather was perfect. Bright sunshine. A gentle breeze. Parents chatted along the sidelines while players warmed up on the field. When Sophie spotted me, her face lit up. She ran over during warm-ups and threw her arms around me. That simple gesture meant more than she could have known. "Grandma, I did not know you were coming," she said. "I did not know I needed permission," I replied with a smile. She laughed, then hurried back to her team. From across the field, I noticed Olivia watching us. Her expression lasted only a second before she looked away. Throughout the game, I remained friendly and pleasant. I greeted people, cheered for Sophie, enjoyed the afternoon. Yet I could sense something had changed. Olivia seemed uneasy. Not because I had done anything wrong, because I was present. For years, she had controlled the narrative surrounding my absence. Presence made that much harder. After the game, several parents gathered near the parking lot. One of them mentioned a family camping trip scheduled later that summer. Another person asked if I was excited about it. Before I could answer, Olivia quickly stepped in. "We have not finalized the guest list yet," she said. The comment was small. Most people probably ignored it. I did not. Neither did the other parent, whose confused expression appeared for just a moment before the conversation moved on. Driving home, I thought about that phrase. Guest list. Families do not usually discuss guest lists when speaking about close relatives. The wording felt transactional. Controlled. Managed. It confirmed what I already suspected. Inclusion was not something that happened naturally anymore. It was something being granted or withheld. A few days later, another message arrived from Michael. He informed me that additional inquiries had been made regarding future trust distributions and property planning. Once again, nothing improper had occurred. But the timing interested me. The more visible I became, the more interest seemed to emerge around matters involving money and authority. I did not react. I did not confront anyone. Instead, I continued observing, continued listening, continued learning. Because for the first time in a very long time, I realized I no longer needed anyone's approval to understand my own value. And once that realization takes root, It becomes impossible to manipulate the person who finally sees the truth. Over the next month, something unexpected happened. The less I chased acceptance, the more obvious everyone's behavior became. People often reveal their true assumptions when they think the outcome is already decided. Olivia seemed especially confident. She carried herself with the relaxed certainty of someone who believed every important piece was already in place. Family events continued. Invitations appeared selectively. Information traveled through certain channels and somehow never reached me directly. Yet I no longer reacted the way I once had. I stopped asking why. Instead, I paid attention to what those choices revealed. One Sunday afternoon, Ethan invited me to lunch. It was the first time he had reached out on his own in quite a while. We met at a small restaurant near the river. The food was good. The conversation was polite. Too polite. The kind of conversation people have when they are avoiding the topic, sitting quietly in the middle of the table. We discussed the weather, Sophie's school activities, and a few local events. Then Ethan casually mentioned that he and Olivia had been thinking about the future. A lot of responsibility comes with managing family assets, he said while stirring his iced tea. Sometimes it makes sense for the next generation to start taking a larger role. I looked at him carefully. His tone sounded rehearsed. Not dishonest. Rehearsed. As though the idea had been discussed many times before. That depends on the people involved, I replied. Ethan nodded, but quickly changed the subject. The moment lasted only seconds, but it told me plenty. Later that week, I received an invitation to a family gathering at Olivia's house. The message arrived through a group text rather than directly from her. That alone was unusual. When I arrived, I noticed something immediately. Several relatives greeted me warmly, almost with relief. They seemed genuinely happy to see me there. During dinner, I listened more than I spoke. Conversations drifted from vacations to retirement plans to property values. At one point, Olivia began discussing long-term family planning. She spoke confidently about future opportunities, future investments, and future decisions. Every sentence carried the subtle assumption that she would be involved in all of them. Nobody challenged her. Nobody questioned her. Why would they? Most of them believed the story she had carefully built over the years. They believed I preferred staying in the background. They believed I was gradually stepping away. As the evening continued, I noticed another detail. Whenever financial matters surfaced, Olivia's attention sharpened. Not greedily. Strategically. She asked questions. Gathered information. Measured reactions. It reminded me of someone studying a map before beginning a journey. By the time dessert was served, I understood something important. Olivia was no longer simply trying to exclude me. She had already moved beyond that stage. In her mind, the process was finished. The position she wanted had already been secured. The future she imagined was already unfolding. Driving home that night, I felt strangely calm. Years earlier, I might have viewed the evening as another painful reminder of distance and manipulation. Now I saw it differently. Confidence can be dangerous when it rests on incomplete information. The more comfortable Olivia became, the less careful she appeared. The more certain she felt, the more openly she revealed her assumptions. She believed the story was ending exactly the way she expected. She believed the important decisions would soon belong to other people. She believed I had accepted my place on the sidelines. What she did not realize was that I was finally seeing the entire board. And when someone mistakes patience for weakness, they often discover the truth far too late. 2 weeks later, the opportunity arrived on its own. I did not create it. I did not force it. I simply allowed people to continue believing what they wanted to believe. The family reunion was scheduled for the first weekend of September at a country club just outside the city. Relatives were traveling from several states away. Cousins I had not seen in years planned to attend. Olivia volunteered to coordinate the entire event. Nobody seemed surprised. She enjoyed organizing things. More importantly, people had grown accustomed to letting her take charge. 3 days before the reunion, Ethan called and asked if I could arrive early on Saturday morning. His tone sounded unusually careful. There are a few family matters we want to discuss while everyone is together, he explained. Family matters. The phrase immediately reminded me of my lunch with him weeks earlier. I agreed without hesitation. On Saturday, I arrived just before 10 o'clock. The clubhouse overlooked a beautiful lake surrounded by tall trees beginning to show hints of autumn color. Families gathered on the patio. Children played near the water. The atmosphere felt warm and welcoming. Yet beneath the smiles, I sensed a different kind of anticipation. Shortly before lunch, Ethan invited several relatives into a private meeting room. Olivia joined him. So did Carol, Rachel, and a handful of other family members. I took a seat near the far end of the table. Michael arrived a few minutes later carrying a leather briefcase. The moment Olivia saw him, her expression changed slightly. Not alarm. Curiosity. She clearly had not expected him to be there. Ethan began speaking first. He explained that the family needed to think about the future. Long-term planning. Responsibilities. Asset management. He spoke carefully, almost as though he were presenting an idea he hoped everyone would support. Olivia nodded throughout the discussion. Occasionally, she added comments about efficiency, organization, and preparing the next generation for leadership. Several relatives listened politely. Others exchanged uncertain glances. Then Ethan turned toward Michael. "Would you explain the current structure?" he asked. Michael stood and opened his briefcase. The room grew quiet. For the next several minutes, he reviewed documents I already knew well. Trust agreements, property holdings, governance provisions, legal responsibilities. Everything was explained clearly and professionally. Then he reached the section I had been waiting for. "It is important that everyone understands one key detail," Michael said. "Final authority regarding these assets remains with Margaret Wilson." Silence filled the room. Complete silence. Michael continued. He explained that Robert had intentionally structured the agreements to ensure long-term oversight remained under my control. Significant changes required my approval. Major distributions required my approval. Future restructuring required my approval. Nothing substantial could proceed without my direct involvement. Across the table, I watched expressions shift. Surprise. Confusion. Realization. Ethan looked stunned. Carol blinked several times. Rachel slowly smiled as though a puzzle piece had finally fallen into place. Olivia remained perfectly still. That was what caught my attention most. She did not argue. She did not interrupt. She simply sat there processing information that clearly did not match the future she had imagined. Michael finished his presentation and returned to his seat. Nobody spoke for several seconds. Finally, Ethan turned toward me. "Mom," he said quietly, "I did not realize all of this was still under your control." I met his eyes. That seems to be a common misunderstanding. No anger. No accusation. Just the truth. Around the room, people shifted uncomfortably. Years of assumptions had suddenly collided with reality. The story everyone believed no longer made sense. The woman who had supposedly stepped away from family decisions had never surrendered those decisions at all. As the meeting ended and relatives slowly filed back toward the reunion, I remained seated for a moment. Through the window, I could see families laughing near the lake. Children running across the grass. Ordinary scenes unfolding beneath an extraordinary realization. For years, people had acted as though my role was shrinking. Yet the documents on that table proved something very different. My place had never disappeared. The only thing that had vanished was everyone's understanding of it. The reunion ended that afternoon, but the real change began afterward. Information has a way of reshaping relationships once everyone is forced to see the same truth. During the following week, my phone rang more than it had in months. Relatives called with questions. Some offered apologies. Others admitted they had assumed I preferred staying away from family gatherings because that was the story they had been told for years. I listened politely. I did not argue. There was no need. The facts now spoke for themselves. Ethan called 3 days after the reunion. His voice sounded different. Quieter. Less certain. We met at my house the following Saturday morning. For a long time, we sat at the kitchen table where I had spent so many lonely afternoons wondering what had happened to my family. Neither of us spoke immediately. Finally, Ethan looked down at his hands. "I should have paid more attention," he said. "I thought everyone was getting along." I thought you wanted more space. I studied my son carefully. He looked older than I remembered. Not physically. Emotionally. Like someone who had just realized how many important moments he had missed. You never asked me, I replied gently. The words were not cruel. They did not need to be. The truth rarely requires volume. Ethan nodded slowly. There was nothing he could say to change the past. We both understood that. What mattered now was whether the future would look different. Over the next several weeks, I met with Michael and finalized a series of decisions Robert and I had discussed years ago. The trusts remained in place. The properties remained protected. But I adjusted how future benefits would be distributed. Educational funds were established directly for Sophie and the younger members of the family. Scholarship provisions were expanded. Several charitable commitments were added. Most importantly, every structure was designed to prevent any single person from controlling access, information, or opportunity. The purpose was not punishment. It was protection. I had spent enough time watching what happened when too much influence gathered in the wrong hands. Olivia never confronted me directly. In fact, after the reunion, she became unusually polite. Messages arrived more frequently. Invitations suddenly appeared. Family events became easier to attend. The change was noticeable. Yet something inside me had changed as well. I no longer measured my worth by whether someone included me. I no longer waited for permission to belong. One crisp October afternoon, Sophie visited my house after school. We sat on the back porch drinking hot chocolate while leaves drifted across the yard. She showed me photographs from a science competition and talked excitedly about college plans that were still years away. At one point she smiled and said, "I am glad you come to things now, Grandma." The comment was simple, innocent, honest. I looked out across the yard and felt a lump form in my throat. Not because I was sad. Because I finally understood what had been taken from me all those years. It was never really about invitations or photographs or family events. It was about connection, presence, the quiet moments that build relationships over time. And now those moments were returning. As the sun began to set, Sophie leaned against my shoulder and continued talking about her future. I listened carefully, smiling at every detail. For the first time in a very long time, I felt something I had almost forgotten. Peace. Not because I had won an argument. Not because anyone had been embarrassed or defeated. But because I had reclaimed something far more valuable. I had reclaimed my place in my own story. And once I stopped allowing other people to define my role, everything else began to fall into place.